Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, dear friends. Thank you for joining the Spiritist Talk series promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm very happy to be here to host this talk by Daniel Ortiz Martinz, who will be leading our live with the theme, To Love Your Enemies is to Love Yourself. I would like to take a brief moment to announce two U.S. Spiritist Federation programs. First, the Initiation into Spiritism virtual course. This course is meant for those who want to learn or review the basic principles of Spiritism. Tomorrow, October 9th, will be our last live Q&A. The complete course is available on our YouTube channel. And secondly, the 25th anniversary of the United States Spiritist Federation will be celebrated at the 16th U.S. Spiritist Symposium in Houston, Texas on November 5th. The theme will be Time for Renewal, Healing, and Regrowth. The symposium is for the whole family. Please go to the spiritistsymposium.org website for more information. The registration is open. Also on the screen, please note there is a QR code. If you want to help the United States Spiritist Federation produce more publications and promote Spiritism to everyone, please scan the QR code. Now back to Daniel. Daniel, it is so good to have you with us today, together with everyone who is watching this live broadcast. I want to give you a very warm welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yes, Daniel. It is so good to have you here to discuss your subject. To love your enemies is to love yourself. I'm sure. Yes, Daniel.
It's a very nice topic. Yet it's a difficult one, I would say. And I just like to thank you and the U.S. Spiritist Federation for the invitation and for the opportunity of being here again with you and share some thoughts on this very special topic.
Beautiful, Daniel, and you're welcome. I'm sure you're as eager as I am to hear from Daniel. Before he starts to enlighten us in the next hour, please allow me to formally introduce him. Daniel Ortiz Martinz, Daniel, is a chemical engineer with a master's degree in marketing and a master's science degree in nanosciences and advanced materials. Daniel has been living in Belgium since 2009. He has been a Spiritist since childhood and has been working in the Spiritist movement in Belgium for about 10 years. Nowadays, Daniel is a member of the board of directors of the Center of Spiritist Studies Camille Flammarion in Brussels, where he's also a speaker and has many other responsibilities.
That's it. Thanks, Sunshine. A very nice introduction. Thanks a lot.
Yes, please. We're excited to hear your talk. Thank you so much for being here, Daniel.
Okay, very good. So as you mentioned, Sunshine, so today I'm going to speak about the love of enemies. So to love your enemies is to love yourself. So I've got here in the agenda today, this topic is really based on the Gospel according to Spiritism, the chapter 12, Love Your Enemies. And I will open with some thoughts on what the modern analytical psychology says about the love of enemies, Jung and the love of enemies. Then I'm going to go back in time by 2,500 years and have a look on what Buddhism says about the understanding and the love of enemies. Then I will go to the Gospel and have a look on what the Gospel says about the love of enemies and what we should understand by love of enemies. Because sometimes there's some misunderstanding of the word love in this context, in the context which Jesus mentioned this statement. And then I'm going to share with you some thoughts that were done by one of the most notable persons ever born in America, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., on the love of enemies. And to enter the final part of my presentation, a few words on hatred. And actually, hatred, and I like very much this definition, is the love that's gone sick. And then I will wrap up with a beautiful text coming from the book Missionaries of the Light, and that speaks about the reincarnation of Sigismund from enemies to father and son. So, if we have a look on what Carl Gustav Jung said about the love of enemies, so he opens by saying something that is really important and really interesting for our evolution, by saying that the acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem. And this is something that 1 year ago we discussed together with you about how to deal with our inner shadow and our inner lights as well, and how they coexist, and how one can get along well with the other. And then Jung says that I feed, and you know that he was a spiritualist, and he said that I feed the hungry, that I forgive an insult, or that I love my enemy in the name of Christ. Of course, all these are undoubtedly great virtues. What I do to the least of my brothers, I do to the Christ himself. But what if I eventually discover that the least among them all, the poorest of all the beggars, and the most impudent of all the offenders, the very enemy myself, resides inside of me? That all these elements, they are within my heart, within my soul, and that I myself stand in need of the alms of my own kindness. What if I discover that myself, I am the enemy who must be loved? What then? What should we do? And then Jung finishes by saying, we say to our brother, or to the brother within us, Raka, and condemn and rage against ourselves. And this is really powerful. This is really strong. And if, as I mentioned to you, if we go back in time, 2,500 years, and we have a look on what the Buddhists say about understanding and loving enemies, the first question that they ask, and for me it's a key question: why do we have to love our enemies? And more important, how can we do that? How can we love them? One of the things that is really interesting in Buddhism is that it teaches understanding as the basis of love. I mean, when you're mindful, or as they say, when you have a very attentive mind, you start to realize that your neighbor is suffering. And then, if you have a little bit of love in your heart, a little bit of compassion in your heart, you can see that suffering, and suddenly you do not want that person to suffer anymore. And this is something we are going to see a little bit later in the slides when we talk about the reincarnation of Sigismund. When we start to see the suffering in others, compassion is born, and we no longer consider he or she as an enemy. We can love our enemies. This is a fact. This is true. The moment we understand that these so-called enemies, they suffer, and the moment we understand we want that suffering to stop, he ceases to be, or she ceases to be, an enemy. And this is a very nice reflection that we have here. When we hate someone, we are angry because either we don't fully understand that person, or we don't understand his or her environment. And the habit of having a comprehensive, a thorough look leads us to the following conclusion: If we had grown up like that person under the same circumstances and having or suffering the same experiences, and if we had lived in that environment, we would be exactly like him, exactly the same. If we had gone through the same paths, if we had worn the same shoes, most probably we would act the same. And that kind of exercise leads to a certain understanding, and that understanding eliminates our anger, eliminates our discrimination, and suddenly that person there is no longer our enemy. And we start to be able to love that person. Uh, to love our enemy is not possible unless she or he is no longer seen like that. And the only way to do that is through a thorough analysis of the person and of the situations. I mean, that particular person caused you a lot of pain in the past. Yes, that person did harm me or my family or someone else. But the right attitude, if we want to be a bigger person here, the right attitude is to ask why that happened. And when we do that, we realize that when someone is unhappy or when someone is in pain, that happiness or that pain spreads around ourselves, spreads around that person. We should never ever underestimate a person that is unhappy or is in deep pain. When we learn the art of understanding, the art of compassion, and the art of tolerance, we will suffer much less and we will inflict much less suffering around ourselves. Looking at living beings with compassionate eyes gives us a wonderful feeling, and we really start to feel integrated to the higher life, to our higher selves. And it is through this practice that suddenly our suffering diminishes and progressively ceases. Why I'm telling all that? Because now I want to show you where these teachings cross with Christianity. Now we forward time by 1700 years, more or less, and we have a look on what Francis of Assisi um, said about love, about forgiveness, about understanding. So, no one can love without forgiveness. No one can forgive without understanding. So we need to analyze. No one can understand without analyzing. And this analysis can only be done with good sense if we experience fraternity, kindness, benevolence, goodness in our hearts. Schematically speaking, so if we want either to love ourselves or to love our loved ones or our enemies, we need to learn to forgive. We need to learn to understand. We need to learn to analyze. And we need to develop fraternity within our hearts. Having said that, let's have a look on what Jesus mentioned about the love of enemies. We have a look on Matthew's Gospel. We were going to see a statement of, "You have learned that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and you shall hate your enemies." These are the teachings coming Moses, because that's what people were capable of absorbing, of understanding by then, 1200 years before Christ. But Jesus said something different. He asked something else. He said, "Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who persecute and malign you, so that you may be children of your Father who is in heaven. And this Father makes the sun rise on the good and on the evil, and makes the rain fall on the just and on the unjust." So what Jesus is asking here is for us to go beyond the average behavior. So what is asking here us is what the modern psychology would call move out of your comfort zone and do something different, do something better, do something a little bit further down in terms of love, in terms of compassion. So, and then Jesus continues. So, if you love only those who love you, what reward will you receive from that behavior? Do not the publicans do that? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing that others do not do? Do not the publicans do the same? And still, if we keep on looking on Matthew's gospel, we're going to see, I say to you that if your justice is not more abundant than that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Again, Jesus asking us to be a better person and to go beyond the average behavior. We can see the same kind of statements if we go to the Gospel of Luke. If you love only those who love you, what reward will you have? Since even sinners also love those who love them. And if you do good only to those who do good to you, what reward will you have? Since the sinners do the same thing. But as far as for you, love your enemies, do good to all, and lend without expecting anything. And then the reward will come, and it will be very great, and it will be considered children of the Most High, who is good to ingrates and even the wicked. Thus, be full of mercy, just like God is full of mercy. So Jesus brings any kind of ethic here. So he throws a very compassionate look towards everybody, saying we are all brothers, we are all sons of the same Father. So even if we're not on the same level of evolution, of capabilities, of loving, still we deserve and the love coming from the Father, and we are very beloved from our Father. So, but then the next question comes, and I believe that the Spiritist philosophy sheds a lot of light in this question particularly. So the question is, why? What should we understand by love your enemies? And frequently there's some misunderstanding as to the meaning of the word love in this context. I mean, we must dig a little bit deeper so we can find the real meaning of the noun love in this statement. So the love for the enemies is something that develops gradually, little by little, in stages, within our limitations and according to our possibilities. Jesus did not mean that we must have for one's enemy the tenderness that one would have for a brother or for a friend. Why? Because love presupposes trust, and we could not trust someone who we know means us harm, that we know wants us, to be in a bad situation, in a bad position, or in a very difficult situation. But to love our enemies, so it cannot mean that we should not make a difference between them, the enemies, and our friends. But, and this is very interesting, we have some small and some everyday attitudes that allows us to reframe situations, reframe experiences, and do little by little steps towards this kind of unconditional love. Let's go through this everyday attitudes. When we say we need to love our enemies, it means that we are not holding neither hatred, rancor, or desires for vengeance against that person. We need to be, as I mentioned before, the better person, the moral person in this kind of situation. It means that we we need and we can to forgive those enemies unconditionally and without ulterior motives for the evil or for for the discomfort that they have caused us. It means not setting up any obstacles to reconciliation, and we are going to see that very clearly in a few examples a little bit later. It means to extend a hand for those people. So it means wanting the good for them instead of wishing them evil. As I mentioned, it means to extend a helping hand in case of need. And this is exactly what we were seeing a few minutes ago. So when we look to the person and we see the suffering and we see just a brother or a sister in need, and we just go there and help that person, despite our differences, despite our visions that sometimes are quite opposite. But I just see a brother or a person in need. But it also means abstaining either in word or in acts from anything that might harm those people. And to finish, Kardec concludes that finally it means repaying their evil with good in everything with no intention of humiliating them. And this is very powerful. But what sometimes we forget, and here I like to bring to your attention a few words that were written by the spirit of Emmanuel in the book Vineyard of Light. What we forget is that we can learn a lot from our enemies. As hard as it sounds, it is the truth. So, and Emmanuel says that certainly no one can readily adhere to complete union, to complete an utter union with the adversary of today. And this is true. It's really hard. So it's not something that happens like that. It takes time. But what we need to bear in mind, since we are spiritists and we believe in reincarnation, multiple lives, and so on, and in the law of action and reaction, or as the Eastern philosophies say, the law of karma, generally we owe high benefits to those who persecute and slander us. Those peoples, they are the instruments that help us work our individuality, and they compel us to make far-reaching renovations that we would rarely understand in the most serious moments of our experience. So, as he mentions here, so these are the people that point out our weaknesses, our deficiencies, and our needs, that have to be met in the tasks that we are performing. And by the rudeness of the enemy, the man, usually turns red and indignant at the same time. And these people, they are courageous doctors who provide us with corrective. But it's really difficult to accept that. And sometimes you could argue by saying, okay, but Emmanuel, in another life, he was a Roman senator, he was a politician, he had a lot of enemies and so on. But if we go back 170 years ago, roughly, and we have a look on the Spirits book, and we go to the question 919a, it's really nice to see what Saint Augustine said about our enemies. And Saint Augustine was one of the largest collaborators of the works with Kardec and so on. And he says in these very words, seek to know what others think about you, in the process of self-knowledge, and do not neglect the opinion of your enemies. Why? Because they have no interest in disguising the truth. That's true. Frequently, God places them beside us as a mirror in order to warn us more frankly than a friend would do. So this is quite interesting to see how our enemies could be some sort of leverage for our evolution, for our enlightenment. And to continue on that thoughts, I would like to share with you something that is very special. And this is the extract of one of the most beautiful sermons given by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And that happened on November 17th, 1957, in Montgomery, Alabama. And it was about loving your enemies. He opens with a very nice question, a very important question. Why should we love our enemies? So it's a difficult question. And sometimes it's quite hard to find good reasons for that. And he starts developing his speech by saying that the first reason that we should love our enemies is this one. Hate for hate only intensifies the existence of hate and evil in the universe. That's true. We know that. So if I hate you and you hit me, and I hit you back, and you hit me back and go on, we will see that that will go on ad infinitum. It just never ends. Somewhere, somebody must have a little sense, has to take the high road, and that's precisely the strong person who does that. And this strong person is the one who can cut off the chain of hate, the chain of evil, the chain of wickedness. So somebody must have at some point in time morality enough to cut it off and inject within the very structure of the universe that strong and powerful element of love. So in a way, love is the antidote here that will provide us healing from our hate or from hatred in general. And if someone does not have sense enough to turn on the beautiful and powerful lights of love in this world, the whole of our civilization will be plunged into the abyss of destruction. And this is true. We are seeing what's happening right now in the world with wars and so on. Man must see and must realize that force begets force. Hate begets hate. Toughness begets toughness. And on the other hand, charity generates charity. Kindness generates kindness. And goodness generates goodness, and so on. But if we, keep on this spiral, on this descending spiral, ultimately, what is going to happen is that we will all end up in destruction for all and for everybody. So somebody must have sense enough and morality enough to cut off the chain of hate in the universe. And that you can do only by love. And here, there's another reason why we should love our enemies. And that is because hate distorts the personality of the hater. We often think about the hated one, but not about the hater. The hater destroys himself progressively with his own hate. It is even more tragic, it is even more ruinous and injurious to the individual who hates. And this is true. When we just begin hating somebody, we will begin to do irrational things. You cannot see straight when you hate, and this is true. You can't walk straight when you hate. You can't stand upright. Our vision is distorted. We become a pathological case. We are ill when we are hating someone. For the person who hates, everything turns upside down. The beautiful becomes ugly. The ugly becomes beautiful. The good becomes bad. The bad becomes good. For the person who hates, the true becomes false and the false becomes true. So everything is not in the right order here. So, and that's what it does to us. That's what hate does to us. We can't see right, period. The symbol of objectivity is completely lost, and hate destroys the very structure of the personality of the hater. And this is why Jesus says the way to be integrated with yourself is be sure that you meet every situation of life with an abounding love. Never hate, because it will end in tragic, neurotic responses. And when we have that in mind, we will realize that hate at any point is like a cancer that gnaws away at the very vital center of our life and our existence. So it's like, corroding acid that eats away the best and the most beautiful and the objective center of our lives. So, like says Jesus, love, because hate destroys the hater as well as the hated. And now, and there's another reason more for us to love our enemies. Uh, Love has within it a redemptive power. So it's the concept of antidote again. So, and this power, that's the one that eventually transforms individuals. If we do not love, we have no tools, we have no way to redeem people from their situations or from the lack of love. So, because if we hate our enemies, we have no way to redeem, we have no way to transform those people. And there's something about love, and we need to bear that in mind. This something builds up and is creative. And there's something about hate that tears down and is destructive. So love your enemies. That's what he mentioned. And in order to extend that a little bit more, so I like very much the vision of this Brazilian author. His name is Andre Moreira. He's a doctor, he's a spiritist speaker as well. And he wrote a book called Reconciliation with Oneself, with Family, with God. Fortunately, there's no translation to English. Um, and he likes to think that if we analyze the people we hate, whether in the present or in the past, these people, they are not irrelevant to our lives. And those people certainly played an important roles in our lives. It is understandable that we want to punish a person. Okay, that person caused us harm, was someone who was in a position that, when that someone abused that position. However, the truth is that when we hate, we are the punished ones, always. Because if there's still hate, it's because there was or there is still love. Where there's resentment, there once have been feelings, there once have been expectations, promises, interests, and wishes that at some point in time they were frustrated or they were unmet. And if the sorrow was still there, it's a sign that they are still alive in our hearts and in our souls. So, and I like very much this saying. This is something coming again from Buddha. Holding rancor is like holding a burning coal and hope that someone else will get burned. So it's like living every day with this darkness inside of us. So we keep living the pain, the betrayal, the aggression over and over and over again. So it's really hard. So in other words, it's like we remain chained to the very person we detest, we hate so much. And his or her actions continue to direct, to control our very present lives. We are not free when we hold rancor or when we hate. It is only when we accept, when we forgive and reframe our experiences that we are able to break the chains that still hold us back. And but the question that we can say right now is how we can do that, how we can forgive, how we can reframe all these experiences. Let's see two practical cases of how forgiveness frees us and how previous bad experiences can be turned into positive ones, can be reframed, and can receive new colors. First example I'd like to share with you, it's from um, the book called Drums of Angola, which is not a translation yet to English. And at some point in time, it tells the story of a lady called Eusalia. And she's a highly illuminated spirit, and she works at the Umbanda religion, which is one of the African Brazilian religions present in that country. And in that, when she's working there, she presents herself in the form of an old black woman, and she's known as Granny Catherine, because that way she can inspire some sort of maternal love when she's talking to people. But most important is that in her penultimate incarnation, she had been a slave in Brazil, and in one of the most terrible episodes in our story, more than 350 years of slavery. And she was kidnapped from Angola. She was the healer, and she was the midwife of her people. Until one day, she fell victim of Sinhazinha's wrath. She was the landowner of that property, and she was the owner of the slaves. Rosalia was taken, and she was tied to the trunk, so-called trunk. It's a wooden pole where people fortunately used to torture the slaves. And in that trunk, she was whipped to death. She was already an illuminated spirit, and no rancor remained in her soul. And sometime later, as a proof of that love, of that evolution, she asked to return to Brazil and to help Sinhazinha, the lady who was her, murderer. A few years later, her demand was granted, and she reincarnated and was no longer black. She was no longer a slave. She was rich, she was wealthy, and she was educated. What happened one day, a desperate father knocked at her door, and he gave him a girl, and that girl has been rejected by her mother. That girl was very strange, sick, and she had leprosy. In spite of all of that, Rosalia adopted her, and that girl grew up. And in spite of being much loved, she caused a lot of trouble. But through that love, something changed in that girl. A few years later, that girl disembodied in her arms, and when Rosalia returned to the spiritual world, she was welcomed in tears of gratitude by the little one, the little girl, who transformed herself back into Sinhazinha in front of Rosalia. This is the power of love. So Rosalia decided to cut this chain of hate that was there. And thanks to her love, she paid back all the anger, all the hate with love. And she was able to transform that lady into someone, into a beloved one. But then we have another case, and this one is really interesting, and we can find it in the book Missionaries of Light, that was written by Chico Xavier and dictated by the spirit of Andre Luis. It tells us at some point in time the story of Sigismund. Sigismund, he was about to reincarnate as the second child of the couple Adelino and Rachel. Those three, they had been the protagonists of a very painful, dreadful tragedy in a previous existence. After a mad, crazy passion, Sigismund murdered Adelino in a regrettable armed competition. It was a duel, and he had led Rachel astray. And the poor creature, she found her way to the brothel. So that was really sad what happened. They disincarnated, each one at his own turn, and they did it under an intense vibration of hatred and despair, suffering several years in inferior zones. Later, through the intercession of redeemed friends, through real love, the former spouses obtained the return to the physical body, and with the idea to sanctify the sentimental ties and to reconnect to the old adversaries. But, as we know, it's often the case, heroes in promise, they fail in fulfillment. In possession of the blessed physical life, Adelino, he refuses to forgive. And even before the reincarnation of the former adversary, he already was manifesting himself against any kind of help. He repels him vigorously every time he goes to sleep, and the dreams start to come. When they arrive at Adelino and Rachel's home, Alexander and Andrea Louise find Sigismund deeply depressed because of the situation he was facing with Adelino. Then Alexander starts to console him, calms him down. And why that? Because Sigismund had taken that imbalance very, very far, too far, and he was accentuating his own sufferings. Alexander quickly intervenes so the tension can be relieved. And then there's a beautiful dialogue taking place between Adelino and Rachel, and he confides his nightmares to his wife. And he says that he's been systematically dreaming of a man that approaches him as a vigorous enemy. And as soon as he gets into bed, he instinctively feels a shadow approaching him. Troubled, he sees that a man approaches him, extending his hands like, a common beggar begging for help. But as that man stares at his face, there's this inexplicable terror and fear that invades his spirit, and he cannot understand that situation. So we could say, again, at the light of psychoanalysis, so we could say that this is something that was in his unconscious, but actually that was one of his memories from a past life. He says, I have the impression he wants to murder me in the back. On certain occasions, I try to reach out to him, overcoming the feeling of dread. But I always run away in a mixture of hatred and a mixture of repugnance. During their sleep in that very night, Adelino and Rachel, they are disconnected from their bodies. We know that the perispirit does that when the physical body is sleeping. And Alexander approaches him, Adelino, because he was a problem. Rachel was a far more evolved person. And he calms Adelino down and proceeds to the reconciliation process between him and Sigismund. And Sigismund, he confesses quite quickly. He says, this ghost drives me crazy. I feel sick. I feel unfortunate. I feel miserable. And then a beautiful dialogue starts between Alexander and Adelino. And the question he does here is really interesting and it's really beautiful. This is how you receive the unhappiest brothers? Where did you put the notions of human solidarity? It is always very easy to love friends, to admire the good ones, to understand intelligence, to defend the family members. But we are not quite yet there. So we have not reached the final redemption. And this is why the adversary is our efficient destructor. Hold on a minute. That's where this message links to what Emmanuel was saying in the book Vineyard of Light. And then he gives a recommendation. For me, this is a very practical one, and we can apply to our everyday lives. Alexander says, embrace with charity the beggar who knocks at your door when you have not yet acquired enough light to welcome him with the love Jesus taught us. Behold the poor brother that is asking for your help. Look at his state of humiliation and need. Imagine yourself in his position and reflect. Wouldn't the cruelty of others tear your soul to pieces? Same kind of reflection that we were discussing in the beginning of this talk. Would you appreciate that someone would classify you as a ghost just because of your displays of suffering? And then Adelino, when he was confronted with all of those reflections, he was crying a lot. Alexander introduces him to Sigismund. Adelino did not hesitate for a moment, and in spite of the great intimate effort, it was with great difficulty that he did that. He went there and he shook his former adversary's hand, deeply moved. Forgive me, brother, Sigismund said with infinite humility. And that's a beautiful scene that happened. The Lord will reward you for the good you're doing for me. And then Adelina says, you're welcome. I will be your friend. And then something that was unexpected happened. The former murderer bowed respectfully and he kissed Adelino's hand. I mean, one gesture means is worth 1,000 words. Sigmund's spontaneous act won Adelino over. That anguished and sad spirit couldn't be bad because he was just there. He just showed a lot of respect and he just kissed his hands with veneration and affection. And that's here that we see the power of forgiveness and the power of love, because then a singular phenomenon just took place. Adelino's spiritual organism seemed to get rid of heavy clouds, of a heavy crust that broke from top to bottom, revealing its luminous characteristics. A soft radiance now was hallowing his personality, revealing his high and noble condition. The forgiveness had been sincere, and those thick shadows of hatred were effectively dispelled and they simply disappear. And this is the end of my talk. I thank you very much. I leave you with this really beautiful message from Joanna of Angelis from the book Offering, saying that on earth, no one advances without the challenge of obstacles, provocations, enemies, and so on. What they accuse you of, they lack. And most important, ours is the task of light against darkness, of love against hate. This is what is expected from us as Spiritists. They have become your enemies, but do not become anyone's enemy. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Daniel, thank you so much for your wonderful talk. Really helping us, helping us to understand the importance of humility, self-forgiveness, hetero-forgiveness, and of course, love, which all of this is an expression of.
Exactly.
So thank you. It's very touching. Yes.
Yes, it's really good. Let me apologize. So because of the noise here, so I had some problems with my computer. I had to move from a different room. I'm sorry, it's not soundproof. Apologies for that.
It was wonderful. We didn't even hear it. Your words were so important. We couldn't hear anything else. Thank you, Dan.
It's very kind. It's very nice of yours. Thank you.
You're welcome. So now we are open
Questions, yeah.
for comments and questions from the audience. And we have already a question by Yasko Aravakava. And she says, hi, by understanding we're imperfect spirits, still in evolutionary construction of their moral values, I wonder if the followers of Spiritism may be better off in loving their enemies.
I wouldn't say better. It's a really good question, because sometimes I have the impression that, oh, we're spirits, we know a lot of things, and we could do this and that. But the things that I wouldn't say better off, but we are more accountable. We have more responsibility in the sense that we've been studying all these elements, all this philosophy, and the more you have in terms of lights, the more responsibilities you have. So you have on your shoulders. So actually, again, so at the end of my talk, I said that one gesture is worth 1,000 words. So, and I really like one phrase coming from Francis of Assisi, and he used to say that the gospel is there to be preached, if necessary, with words. So we need to give the example. So we have a lot of information, a lot of tools in the Spiritist philosophy that help us really, really a lot in terms of love, in terms of forgiveness, and so on. And also, once we understand that we're here now, as incarnate spirits, at some point in time we will disembody and we will continue our lives and we will meet those people and we will need to learn how to love them because otherwise we will not evolve. So, so there's a lot of responsibility, I would say, on us.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Daniel. Yes, it is very important to also keep the bigger picture in mind, right?
Exactly, exactly. Yeah.
So I think we have another question by Debbie Wallace, and here it is. How can I forgive a narcissist I know is partially responsible for his suicide? It's a
Yeah,
secret.
that's a very, very good question. A strong, that's a very strong situation. So let's take up, let's see it in two different things. So first of all, so the person who suicided, so that person needs a lot of love. So imagine the amount of pain that person was going through to get to that point in which the pain is so strong that he wants his existence to cease, to end. And if I may share something with you, we have our mediumistic sessions, and some people that committed suicide, they go there and they just say, "I just want to stop existing." And we said, "I'm sorry, I see through your pain, but that's not possible. We have been created for eternity and as an act of love." And so, first of all, a lot of love towards the person who committed suicide. The other one, who's partially responsible, this one will be held accountable. So he will have to respond to that because he's as guilty as the other one. When I say guilty, so he's as responsible as the other one. So, and again, when we have the bigger picture, as you said very well, Sunshine, um, we see that no matter what we do today, we will need to face the consequences of our acts. As long as we think that with that everything ends, we will keep doing whatever we want, and we will keep harming people. We will keep, doing bad things next to us. But as soon as we understand that we are the result of our actions, of our thoughts, or deeds in this life and in previous ones, we will be much more careful. We will pay much more attention. And in our case, what I would say, so we don't have the rights of being judges in terms of what the other people did. What they did, it's their problems. They will face their consequences before God's justice. We would just need to hope that that person at some point in time will come to some sense, realize the consequence, and then when he or she meets again the person who committed suicide, that he will be in a better condition, and that will go in better terms. Because we saw what happened. One killed the other, and then they reincarnated together in the same family as father and son. Hope that helps with the.
Yes, wonderful, Daniel. Yes. It's the responsibility factor, right? That we like to overlook, that what we're giving, we receive, both in the positive as well as in
Exactly.
the negative. I'm
Exactly.
always working on this one here. Yeah. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
So there is another question by Kirsten De Santos, and she says,
Mhm.
but it seems like we have a pandemic of lack of self-love. So how can we love others if we don't know how to love our own selves?
This is a beautiful question, and I think that asking this question, we have already. I mean, so it's a beautiful diagnosis, and it's actually there. So the answer is already there. So we need to we need first to learn how to love ourselves. And how do we love ourselves? By forgiving ourselves, by learning to analyze, but starting to feel fraternity, kindness, goodness, benevolence in our hearts. So by doing, uh, there's a very, let's say, simple recipe. If we want to start to love ourselves, start doing good things. Start doing the good. So go there, help someone. So offer your time, talk to someone, learn to love the nature, learn to love the people that is around surrounding us, learn to love the people that share an office with you, your colleagues, and the life will give back to us what we give her from the bottom of our heart. So when we start to feel like that, that compassion, that happiness, because we are integrated with life, with God, with our higher self, we start to feel better, and we start to feel something different. So sometimes if we have love in our hearts, and we can see that in the gospel according to Spiritism, if we have love, we have everything that we need to go through life, to go through our existence. All the rest will come once we start loving. But of course, in order to love others, as she said very well, so we need to start loving ourselves. And it is, don't be, we cannot be too harsh on ourselves. We need to bear in mind that probably this is the first incarnation during which we have a little bit more of self conscious, a little bit more of self awareness, because before that, we simply didn't care. We're not looking for, future lives, reincarnation. Oh, it should be a good one. No, we were just doing, sometimes we were doing very bad things. But maybe in this incarnation, or the past two incarnations, we are having some sort of lucidity, and we are starting to learn. So we stayed much more time, on the dark side between brackets than on the luminous one. And now it's for us, and we're still learning how to love ourselves. And this is a process, this is a journey. It will take time. And, little by little, looking into the future, knowing that we have a baggage, we have the past. But, uh, the recipe is always to do good. So when we do good, we love, everything else will come naturally.
Exactly, Daniel. It sounds so easy, and yet
Sounds easy.
it takes
Yeah.
so many lifetimes.
It takes time. It takes time. Yeah.
But it's very wonderful and reassuring to have the clarity, right? What we need to do. And then we can every day, every night, just work towards that goal, right? Every day
Um,
a little bit more and
you
better.
mentioned something quite interesting. So actually, we know what we need to do, but the distance between here and here is
That's it.
enormous. It's very long, and we know what we have to do, but to put that in practice, sometimes it's more complication. So
Yes.
sorry.
Thank you for the reminder, though, Daniel. So, there's another question from the US Spiritist Federation. When we consider that the enemy lives really inside of us, as Jung stated, and people like Byron Katie, who have developed methods of self-inquiry, and Jesus and Emmanuel allude to, isn't the work of self-forgiveness, self-understanding the most effective or only way to love our perceived outside enemies?
That's a really nice one. That's a really nice one. Let me see if I can answer that. So the self forgiveness, the self understanding is really an effective way. But what we have to bear in mind again, and again, someone asked something about our responsibilities or spirits better off and so on. So sometimes we think as spiritists we are better off than everybody else because we have access to information that some people sometimes do not have. But we need to bear in mind that God is a beloved Father, and He wants the good for every single son, every single child of His own in the world. We respond very well to the Spiritist teachings because there's something inside us that, is vibrating at the same frequency as the Spiritist thinking. And this is beautiful. But as I mentioned to you, and that's what I like to do when I do my talks. I start to play with the timeline. So I go, so we go back 2,500 years, and if we take into consideration the fact that Jesus is teaching us all this stuff through different people, through different missionaries in our existence, in the history of humanity, about 6,000 years, ever since we started to write. So sometimes the person who goes there and says something is a different one, but the content is the same. We saw Emmanuel, we saw Carl Gustav Jung, we saw Buddha, we saw Jesus, we saw Kardec, we saw Francis of Assisi. They're all saying the same thing. And God loves us so much that let's see to which method or to which philosophy you are going to respond better. We respond quite well to the Spiritist teaching. Some people will respond better to Byron Katie. Some people will respond better to Buddha. Some people will respond better to Confucius, and so on. So, but the thing is that in order to ensure that the message gets through, our Holy Father from time to time sends different messengers, and these people, they ensure that the same message is spread around the globe, not only this globe, but everywhere. So I think it's hard to say that one is better than the other, but I think that we should say which one is the more suitable. So that person there will respond better. We were speaking about suicide. So suppose that we have someone that is about to commit suicide, and I go there and say everything about Emmanuel, everything about Kardec. The person probably will not respond, but she might respond to something different. And once she does, and she's in a better condition, maybe I can say something about Jesus, about Emmanuel, about everybody else. So I think that as long as it comes from the heart, as long as it comes from the very beautiful condition of being human, of being a human being, it's, and if it's efficient, for me, that's good.
Thank you, Daniel. Exactly. And just within one lifetime, we change and we need messages from different areas too, right? Everyone puts the light on our needs in a different way.
To give you an example, so again, going back to the mediumistic groups that we have here. So we are at the heart of Europe, right? So we have here in Brussels about 180 different ethnies, nationalities, something like that. And that has reflex when we're working with a hedonistic group. So we have different nationalities that come as well. People from India, people from China, people from Middle East, and so on, that goes there and they work. Sometimes the language is a little bit different, the way that things are put there, but their hearts are vibrating at the same frequency as ours, and that's what matters.
Exactly. It's the heart again, right?
It's the heart.
It's the heart again. So it looks like those are the questions. Oh no, there's another one. Are you available for another one, Daniel? So it's from the United States Spiritist Federation again. In this time of so much division and lack of tolerance of different opinions, how can we rise above it and avoid getting contaminated by the inferior energies that it brings to us?
Yeah, this is a really, really good question. I like it because we can develop it so much. So first thing, let's put in practice what we know. So very simple things like praying. So when we pray, what we are doing. So we are getting in touch with higher spirits, higher energies. So we are attracting toward us sometimes energies that really have a healing, a calming power. And that the first thing is that, and I like that very much because Divaldo Franco, through his books, and Joanna of Angelis, she says that a lot. So when we pray, it's like we are just spreading light around ourselves, it's like we are entering in a room that is really a mess. And then by praying, so we will spread light, the mess will still be there, but we will know the job that we need to do, the work that has to be done. So, first of all, praying, first of all, trying to keep the faith in the Spiritist teachings and what Jesus said. Um, I think that we need to establish a very close relationship with our mentors, with our spiritual guides. They are our friends. Sometimes they are our family. Sometimes they are like father and son, mother and daughter, and mother and son. So, this close relationship really helps us to go through all the difficulties that we have in our lives. I give you a very good example. Before this very talk, so I was praying in order to have the right inspiration, the right strength, and to choose the right words to deliver to everybody else. And I was talking to my guides, to my mentors, like I was talking to my father, like I was talking to my mother. And that's relationship is really soothing. It really helps us to go through. And again, so when we look into the gospel, Jesus' gospel, the gospel according to Spiritism, so we know when we, instead of getting into fights, we need to fight. We need to understand that the universe vibrates in the frequency of reconciliation. And when we want to reconcile, when we want to shorten distances rather than increasing gaps, we find a way. We find a common ground. We find common understanding, and we have in maybe it's my perception, but I think that we have this responsibility. We have this obligation as a spiritist to be the higher persons, to be the moral persons. If you look again into the gospel according to Spiritism, so there's this chapter I love so much is the number 17, be perfect, and there you can find this kind of practical guide called the moral person. You have all the qualities of a person that is really illuminated, and that's beautiful. We have a very strong recipe there to develop more illuminated spirits, better people. And really, when in troubled times, I really like to read that extract. For me, it's one of the most beautiful in the Spiritist philosophy. I
Thank you.
hope I helped with the question, with the answers.
Oh, yeah, definitely. What I heard is prayers, and of course, they connect us also to our hearts more. And
Exactly.
then also just rereading chapters, right? Just using the gospel, opening it up, and boosting our capacity to love more, right? Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And the thing, I think that the what we should tell ourselves is that how do we put that in practice? How do we all those teachings? Because we have a lot of knowledge in the Spiritist philosophy, but how do we put them into practice in our homes, in our jobs, in the universities, at school, in our family? How do we do that? I think this is the question that we have to try to answer every day.
Yes. And I'm guessing charity is a good guideline.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. It is. It is. It
Yeah.
is.
And I think, do we have another question? No? Yes, we do. All right. And I think that may be our last one. So
Oh,
this
that's a
is
good one.
yeah, this is from the International Spiritist Council. What impact does hate or lack of forgiveness have on our physical and mental health?
Yeah. So we had uh, two very strong examples in the during the talk. One coming from Martin Luther King, and the other one coming from the reincarnation of Sigismund. So if we go, we know from Spiritist philosophy that all our illnesses, our sicknesses, they start in our spiritual body, in our perispirit. So when there's some imbalance there, and if this imbalance remains for too long, so it will go through our physical body, and we will get sick, and we will have some consequences. The physical body works like a sponge to our spiritual body. So having that in mind, so if we keep on hating, if we keep on feeding the rancor, if we keep on feeding, this horrible situations, and leave and not forgiving, this will remain in us. This will remain in our spiritual bodies, and at some point in time, that uh, will be transmitted to our physical bodies. And also, when we keep feeding this chain of hate, what happens is that we will attract to us spirits from lower zones with very bad behaviors, with that sometimes are really inferior, and sometimes that they are really weak, and then they do not want us, to move forward, and we will be constantly assaulted by them. And again, and they will induce us a lot of different behaviors, sometimes even suicide. And then our minds will be troubled all the time. And when that happens, at some point in time, all the trouble will have repercussions in our physical bodies. When we see the reconciliation between Sigismund and his future father, what happened? When that forgiveness came, all the shadows, all the crust that was around him, it broke. And then the luminous part, the inner self, the beautiful one, had his place. He emerged. So, and this is how God sees each one of us. So we are like little diamonds. Sometimes we are covered in mud, but we are still the little diamonds. The divine seed is still there. The divine essence is still there. So, and the more we look for it, the longer we remain in this divine path and in this light, the better we will feel, and the better will be the repercussions on our physical and mental health.
We love the image of the little diamonds.
I like
Yes.
it very much as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. Thank you so much, Daniel. We've learned so much today from you, and we know what our path looks like, and we will be practicing.
Thank you so much, Sunshine. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed our talk. Thank you so much.
Yes, so did we. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Bye bye.
Yeah, so we have a few more announcements though. So we also want to thank our audience, everyone who was here today to watch Daniel's talk, and also those who have been following our weekly Spiritist Talk series. So now next Saturday, October 15th, we won't be having our regular live talk. Instead, we will be streaming live the 10th World Spiritist Congress, which takes place from October 14th through the 16th. For more information, please go to the United States Spiritist Federation website or to www.10, that's the numeral 10, CEM.com. So please join us next week for this special event. As we're about to end our live today, I would like to remind everyone again of the upcoming 16th U.S. Spiritist Symposium on November 5th in Houston, Texas. Make sure to register your whole family so we can spend a full day of learning more about Spiritism and sharing our life experiences and friendship. Let's also celebrate 25 years of the United States Spiritist Federation together. And please don't miss tomorrow, Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the last live Q&A of the Initiation into Spiritism course. Before we close today, Daniel, would you please be willing to give us a closing prayer? You're on mute. You're on mute, Daniel.
Yes, there we go. Yes, with great pleasure. Okay,
Yeah.
so I invite you all, if you feel comfortable to do that, to close your eyes, to take a deep breath. We inhale, we exhale, and we feel this serenity, this peace of heart into our very souls. And it is with great gratitude that we thank all the spirits that inspired us during this talk, that we thank Jesus, that we thank our Heavenly Father for this moment, for sharing so beautiful things, so beautiful thoughts. And we humbly ask God to give us the strength to continue on this path towards spiritual evolution. So be it. Thank you all.
And so it is. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank
And thank you again. Thank you again for this beautiful presentation.